When my son hired someone to keep an eye on me, he didn't expect she'd be the one I'd trust with everything he wanted to steal. My name is Eleanor, and at 73 I thought I knew my son Michael. Turns out you can raise someone for 18 years and still be looking at a stranger when there's money involved. It started with little stumbles. My hip catching when I stood up, my hand missing the kitchen counter. The kind of thing that happens when your body starts betraying you in small, humiliating ways. Michael noticed, of course. He'd always been observant, a quality I'd been proud of when he was younger. "Mom, you seem unsteady," he'd say during his weekly visits, which had become more frequent after his father died 2 years ago. "Maybe we should talk about getting you some help." Help. Such an innocent word, isn't it? I thought he meant someone to clean the gutters or carry groceries. I should have known better. Michael was a lawyer after all. He'd learned long ago that the most dangerous conversations start with the gentlest words. "I don't need help," I'd tell him, stubborn as the day is long. "I've been taking care of myself for 73 years, thank you very much." But then came the morning I couldn't open the pickle jar. Such a silly thing to break a person, but there I was, crying over pickles at 8 in the morning. That's when I called Michael. I said, the words tasting like defeat. "I might need that help you mentioned." Within a week, Michael had arranged everything. "Her name's Rosa," he told me over takeout Chinese. "She's 42, has excellent references, and she's available to start Monday." "What exactly will she be doing?" Michael's smile was the same one he'd worn as a child trying to talk his way out of trouble. "Just keeping you company, Mom. Help with groceries, maybe some light housekeeping." I should have asked more questions. Should have wondered why he was so eager to arrange my life for me, why he'd taken charge so completely. But I was lonely, if I'm being honest. The house felt too big with just me rattling around in it, and my friends were either dead or in facilities themselves. The idea of having someone to talk to, someone who might actually listen, was more appealing than I wanted to admit. Rosa arrived on a Monday morning in October, when the leaves outside my living room window were just starting to turn. She was smaller than I'd expected, with kind eyes and calloused hands that spoke of real work. Not the manicured perfection I'd imagined when Michael said he'd found someone through an agency. "Mrs. Patterson," she said, and her voice carried just a hint of an accent that made my name sound prettier than it had in years. "I'm Rosa. I'm very happy to meet you." She didn't try to take over, which surprised me. Instead, she asked what I usually did in the mornings, how I liked my tea, whether I preferred the curtains open or closed. Small questions that showed she was paying attention to me, not just going through the motions. We settled into a routine easily enough. She'd arrive at 9, make us both tea, Earl Grey for me, chamomile for her, and we'd sit in the living room while I sorted through old photographs or worked on the crossword puzzle. She was good at crosswords, better than Michael had ever been, and she never made me feel stupid when I couldn't remember a word that used to come easily. "You have beautiful handwriting," she said one morning, watching me fill in the puzzle. "Like they taught in school when it mattered." I laughed. Everything was different when it mattered, dear. Those first few weeks I found myself looking forward to 9 o'clock. Rosa had stories about her family in Guatemala, her daughter studying to be a nurse. She never complained, even when I was cranky about my medications. Michael called every few days to check in. "How's Rosa working out?" he'd ask, and I'd tell him she was lovely. What I didn't mention was how she'd started staying later, helping me organize papers or bringing homemade soup. "She's very attentive," I told him after Rosa had been with me for about a month. "Sometimes I think she cares more about my day than you do." It was meant as a joke, but Michael's silence on the other end of the line stretched too long. "That's what we're paying her for, Mom," he finally said. "To care." Something in his tone made me feel cold. Not the kind of cold that comes from old bones and poor circulation, but the kind that settles in your chest when you realize something isn't quite right. I started paying closer attention after that. To the things Michael said and didn't say. To the way he'd ask about my affairs, and whether I was keeping up with my paperwork. The thing about getting older is that people assume you've gotten stupider along the way. But my mind was still sharp, even if my body was failing me. It was Rosa who helped me see it clearly, though she didn't mean to. We were going through some old financial statements that had been piling up in my desk drawer. Not because I couldn't handle them, but because they felt overwhelming when you're managing everything alone. "Mrs. Patterson," she said gently, looking at a bank statement, "do you mind if I ask why there are so many withdrawals to Michael's account?" I looked at the paper she was holding. Sure enough, there were transfers I didn't remember making. 500 here, 1,000 there. Always with a note that said, household expenses, or medical costs. I don't remember authorizing those, I said slowly. Rosa's face was careful, the way it gets when someone's trying not to alarm you. Perhaps you should ask Michael about them? I'm sure there's an explanation. But there was something in her voice that suggested she had her own suspicions about what that explanation might be. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Michael's recent conversations, his concern about my confusion, his suggestions that maybe someone else should handle the financial side of things. Someone like him. It hadn't occurred to me that his concern might have more to do with my bank account than my health. The next morning I asked Rosa if she'd mind driving me to run some errands. Of course, she said, no questions asked. She never pried, never made me explain myself. Just accepted that I might have my own reasons for wanting to get out of the house. Our first stop was the bank. I'd like to speak with someone about my accounts, I told the young man at the desk. Specifically about some transfers that were made without my explicit permission. Took 2 hours and 3 different people before I got the whole picture. Michael had power of attorney for my medical decisions, something I'd signed after his father died just in case something happened to me. But somehow that had extended to financial decisions as well. The paperwork was complicated, full of legal language that made my head spin, but the bottom line was clear. Michael could access my accounts whenever he wanted to. And he had been. Regularly. Is there anything I can do about this? I asked the bank manager, a middle-aged woman with sympathetic eyes. You can revoke the power of attorney, she said. But you'll need to do it through a lawyer to make sure it's done properly. Rosa was quiet on the drive home, but I could feel her glancing at me. Finally she spoke. Mrs. Patterson, I hope you don't mind me saying this, but my grandmother went through something similar with one of her sons. It's more common than people think. What did she do? Rosa's smile was small and sad. She made sure her affairs were in order. Made sure the people who actually cared about her were taken care of. That evening I called a lawyer. Not Michael's firm, I wasn't that naive, but someone from the phone book. Old-fashioned maybe, but I trusted what I could see with my own eyes. The lawyer's name was Patricia Hendricks, and she agreed to see me the next afternoon. Rosa offered to drive me and I accepted gratefully. I wasn't sure I trusted myself behind the wheel when I was this angry. Mrs. Patterson, Patricia said after I'd explained the situation, I see this more often than I'd like to. Adult children who convince themselves they're helping while they're actually helping themselves. The good news is that you still have options. She explained that I could revoke Michael's power of attorney and create new documents. I could change my will, restructure my accounts, put safeguards in place that would protect my assets. The question is, she said, what do you want to happen to your estate when you're gone? I thought about it during the drive home. Rosa was quiet beside me, giving me space to process what I'd learned. When we pulled into my driveway I made a decision. Rosa, I said, would you mind coming in for some tea? I have something I'd like to discuss with you. We sat in my living room, the same place where we'd shared so many mornings over the past few months. The afternoon light was slanting through the windows, making everything look golden and peaceful. It was hard to believe that just a few hours ago my world had shifted so dramatically. I want you to know, I said, that I've figured out what Michael's been doing. With my money, I mean. Rosa nodded slowly. I was afraid of that. You knew. I suspected. The way he'd ask about your routines, about who you talked to, about your paperwork. And then those bank statements. She shook her head. My grandmother always told me to watch out for family members who suddenly become very interested in your business. I laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. Wise woman, your grandmother. She was. She also taught me that family isn't always about blood. Sometimes the people who care about you most are the ones who choose to be there, not the ones who have to be. Something about the way she said it made my throat tight. Rosa, I need to ask you something and I want you to be honest with me. Do you need this job? I mean financially. She was quiet for a long moment. Mrs. Patterson, I like working for you. You're kind to me, you treat me with respect. You listen when I talk about my daughter. That's not something I can say about every family I've worked for. That's not what I asked. Another pause. My daughter needs surgery next year. For her back, she was in an accident when she was younger and it's getting worse. The insurance will cover some of it but not all. So yes, I need the work. I nodded. And if something happened to me? If Michael decided he didn't need your services anymore? Rosa's face went very still. Then I'd find another job. I always do. What if you didn't have to? Over the next few weeks I made several trips to Patricia's office. Rosa drove me each time, never asking questions. She just made sure I had water and helped me in and out of the car. I rewrote my will, created new power of attorney documents and set up protected trusts. And I made sure Rosa would never have to worry about her daughter's surgery. Michael didn't notice anything at first. As far as he knew, his mother was still the confused old woman who needed his help. I let him think that. Rosa noticed the change in me though. The way I sat straighter, smiled more. You seem lighter, she said one morning. Like you've put down something heavy. I have, I told her. I've put down the weight of other people's expectations. It was a Thursday in December when everything came to a head. Michael had been calling more frequently, asking about my confusion, suggesting that maybe it was time to think about moving somewhere with more support. Somewhere where I wouldn't have to worry about managing my own affairs. I've been looking at some facilities, Mom, he said during one of his visits. Really nice places with activities and medical staff on site. You'd have friends your own age. I have a friend, I said, nodding toward Rosa, who was in the kitchen preparing lunch. And I'm not confused, Michael. I'm old. There's a difference. His smile was patronizing. Of course you're not confused. I just think it would be good for you to have more support. Professional support. You mean you think it would be good for you to have more control? The silence that followed was thick enough to cut. Michael's face went through several expressions before settling on something that looked like concern but felt like calculation. Mom, I'm worried about you. These suspicions, these accusations, they're not like you. Maybe we should have Dr. Morrison take a look, see if there's something going on medically. There's nothing going on medically, I said firmly. There's something going on financially though. Something you and I need to discuss. I could see him weighing his options, trying to decide whether to keep pretending or change tactics. He chose pretension. I don't know what you mean. I mean the money you've been taking from my accounts. I mean the power of attorney you've been using to make decisions without consulting me. I mean the way you've been treating me like I'm incompetent so you can control my life. Rosa appeared in the doorway between the kitchen and living room, a dish towel in her hands. She didn't say anything, just stood there like a quiet witness to what was happening. Michael's face flushed. Mom, I've only been trying to help you. Those transfers were for your expenses, for Rosa's salary, for maintaining the house. Those transfers were for 3 times what Rosa's salary costs and twice what it takes to maintain this house, I interrupted. Don't lie to me, Michael. I may be old, but I'm not stupid. Nobody said you were stupid, he said, but his voice had taken on an edge. You're just confused. It's normal at your age. That's why I've been helping you manage things. Helping yourself, you mean? The mask slipped then just for a moment and I saw something in my son's face that broke my heart. Not guilt or shame or even anger. Just cold calculation, like I was a problem to be solved rather than a person to be loved. You can't manage your own affairs anymore, he said flatly. You're not competent to make these kinds of decisions. Anyone can see that. Anyone except the lawyer I've been working with, I said quietly. And the bank manager who's been helping me restructure my accounts. And the 3 doctors who examined me at my request and found me completely competent to make my own decisions. Michael went very still. What lawyers? What doctors? The ones who helped me revoke your power of attorney, I said. The ones who witnessed me signing new documents that put my affairs back under my own control. The color drained from his face. You can't do that. You're not. You need supervision, medical oversight. I need my son to love me more than he loves my money, I said, and my voice cracked just a little. But apparently that's too much to ask. Rosa stepped forward then, her presence calm and steady. Michael, she said, and her voice was gentle but firm, I think it's time for you to leave. He looked at her like he was seeing her for the first time. You, he said, and his voice was full of accusation. You did this. You turned her against me. Nobody turned me against you, Michael, I said. You did that all by yourself. After he left, slamming the door like a teenager instead of a 40-year-old man, Rosa and I sat in silence for a long time. She'd made fresh tea but neither of us was drinking it. Are you all right? She finally asked. I thought about it. Was I all right? I just confronted my only child about stealing from me. I discovered that the person I'd raised and loved and sacrificed for saw me as nothing more than a source of income. I'd had to accept that the relationship I thought we had was built on lies and manipulation. No, I said. I'm not all right. But I will be. Rosa nodded. Takes time. After my grandmother cut ties with her son, she used to say that grief isn't just for when people die. Sometimes you have to grieve who you thought they were. Your grandmother sounds like she was very wise. She was. She also said that when people show you who they are, believe them the first time. I laughed, surprising myself. I should have listened to your grandmother years ago. The next morning, Rosa arrived with a small wrapped box. I have something for you, she said, setting it on the kitchen table next to my tea. Inside was a photograph in a simple silver frame. It showed Rosa and her daughter, both of them smiling at the camera. The girl looked to be about 20, with Rosa's kind eyes and a bright, hopeful expression. Her name is Carmen, Rosa said. She's studying to be a nurse. She wants to help people the way you've helped me. I haven't helped you, I protested. You're the one who's been helping me. Mrs. Patterson, Rosa said gently, you gave me back my faith in people. After some of the families I've worked for, I was starting to think kindness was just something people performed when they wanted something. You showed me that wasn't true. I looked at the photograph, at the hope in that young woman's face. Tell me about her surgery. Rosa's face tightened. It's scheduled for March. The doctors say she'll need at least 6 months of recovery time, maybe more. She won't be able to work, won't be able to study. I've been trying to save money, but with her school expenses and my own bills. How much does she need? For the surgery and recovery, I mean. Mrs. Patterson, you don't need to. How much, Rosa? She named a figure that was substantial but not impossible. Not even close to what Michael had been siphoning from my accounts over the past year. That afternoon I called Patricia. I want to set up a trust, I told her. For Rosa's daughter's medical expenses and education. And I want to make sure Rosa herself is taken care of, regardless of what happens to me. Are you sure about this? Patricia asked. It's a significant gift. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. The papers were ready by the end of the week. Rosa drove me to Patricia's office one last time, though she didn't know why. She'd offered to wait in the car, but I asked her to come in with me. Mrs. Patterson? Patricia said when we were seated in her office. Are you ready to sign the final documents? I looked at Rosa, who was sitting beside me with a puzzled expression. She'd been patient with all my errands and appointments, never prying, never asking for explanations. She'd simply trusted that I knew what I was doing. Rosa, I said, I need to tell you something. The documents I'm signing today, they concern you. Her face went carefully blank. Mrs. Patterson, if this is about my job. It's not about your job. Well, not exactly. I took a breath. I've set up a trust for Carmen's surgery and recovery. All of it. The medical bills, her living expenses while she's unable to work, everything. Rosa stared at me. You can't. That's too much. I can't accept. You're not accepting anything, I said firmly. I'm giving it. There's a difference. But why? Because, I said, and I felt the weight of the past few months settling into the words. You showed me what family really means. Not blood, not obligation, not what people can take from you. But what they give to you freely without expecting anything in return. Rosa's eyes filled with tears. Mrs. Patterson. Eleanor, I corrected. If we're going to be family, you should call me Eleanor. I signed the papers with Rosa sitting beside me, her hand warm on my shoulder. Patricia witnessed the documents, and just like that, everything was official. Carmen would have her surgery. Rosa would have security. And I would have the peace of knowing that my choices were my own. Michael called that evening. He'd had time to think, he said. Time to cool down. Maybe we could work something out, find a way to manage my affairs that would be good for everyone. I've already worked something out, I told him. With a lawyer. My affairs are managed just fine, thank you. Mom, you're making a mistake. Rosa, she's not who you think she is. She's just an employee. She doesn't really care about you. I looked across the room at Rosa, who was reading in the chair by the window. She'd stayed late again, not because I'd asked her to, but because she could tell I needed the company. Tomorrow she'd arrive with chamomile tea and stories about Carmen's classes. She'd help me with the crossword puzzle and listen to me talk about her father without looking bored or impatient. "You're right about one thing," I told Michael. "She is an employee. But she's also the person who sits with me when I can't sleep. She's the one who brings me soup when I'm not eating well. She's the one who remembers that I like the curtains open in the morning and closed at night. She's the one who treats me like a person instead of a bank account. She's paid to do those things." "No," I said quietly. "She's paid to keep me company and help with light housekeeping. Everything else, the kindness, the respect, the genuine care, that's who she is. And that's worth more than money." There was a long silence. Then Michael said, "You'll regret this." "Maybe," I admitted. "But I'll regret it as myself making my own choices, not as someone else's idea of who I should be." After I hung up, Rosa came over and sat on the couch beside me. "Are you sure you're all right?" I thought about it again. Was I all right? I'd lost my son, at least the version of him I thought I knew. I'd had to accept some hard truths about family and trust and love. I'd had to face the reality that getting older means becoming vulnerable in ways that some people will exploit. But I'd also found something I hadn't expected. I'd found someone who saw me as I was and cared about me anyway. I'd found a way to make choices that mattered, to use what I had in ways that would make a difference. I'd found a different kind of family, one built on choice rather than obligation. "Yes," I said, and for the first time in months I meant it completely. "I'm all right." Rosa smiled and squeezed my hand. "Good. Because Carmen wants to meet you when she comes home for Christmas. She wants to thank the woman who's making her dreams possible." "Tell her she doesn't need to thank me," I said. "Tell her she just needs to be happy. That's thanks enough." Later that night, after Rosa had gone home, I sat in my quiet house thinking about my choices. Michael would probably contest the will when I was gone, claim I was incompetent. But I had medical evaluations and a lawyer who documented everything. More importantly, I had the satisfaction of knowing I'd trusted the right person. That when it mattered most, I'd been smart enough to see the difference between someone who wanted to use me and someone who simply wanted to know me. I made myself a cup of tea, Earl Grey the way Rosa had taught me to make it properly, and sat in my living room watching the snow fall outside. Tomorrow Rosa would arrive at 9 o'clock. We'd do the crossword puzzle together, and she'd tell me about Carmen's latest letter from school. We'd sort through more old photographs and she'd listen to the stories behind them without checking her watch or looking bored. And I'd know that I was exactly where I belonged, with exactly the right person taking care of me. When my son hired someone to keep an eye on me, he thought he was protecting his investment. Instead, he gave me the greatest gift of my later years. He introduced me to someone who saw me for who I really was. He just didn't expect that person would be the one I'd trust with everything he thought should be his. Some lessons, I suppose, you can only learn the hard way. And some gifts come disguised as something else entirely.